The morning had started like any other at my lakefront property. Sunlight filtered through the tall pines surrounding my 3 acres of paradise, casting dappled shadows across the wooden deck I had built with my own hands. After 15 years of city living and saving every extra dollar, I had finally purchased this sanctuary last year. The small lake, approximately 2 acres in size, had been the main selling point. Clean, spring-fed water perfect for swimming and fishing, with enough privacy to feel like my own personal retreat while still being just a 20-minute drive from work. I poured my morning coffee and walked barefoot down to the dock, a ritual I had come to cherish in the months since moving in. The natural world was always most vibrant at dawn. Birds called to one another in the canopy overhead. Occasionally, I would spot deer drinking from the far side of the lake, their reflections perfect mirrors on the still water. This morning, however, something was wrong. The familiar earthy scent of clean water had been replaced by something foul. I set my coffee mug down on the dock and peered into the water. Instead of the clear blue depths I had come to know, the lake had developed an unusual cloudy appearance with a slight oily sheen on the surface. Near the shoreline, I spotted something white floating. Moving closer, my stomach dropped. It was a fish, belly up, its unseeing eye staring at the morning sky. Not just one fish, I realized as I scanned the shoreline. Dozens of them, perhaps more, lined the edge of my once pristine lake. Panic rose in my chest as I hurried back to the house to grab my phone. This was no natural occurrence. Something had poisoned my lake overnight. The county environmental agency promised to send someone immediately. "Do not touch the water," the woman on the phone warned. "If this is what we suspect, it could be a serious health hazard." 3 hours later, Jordan Chen from the County Environmental Protection Division confirmed my worst fears. These readings indicate significant fecal contamination, raw sewage to be plain about it. And based on these levels, this is not a one-time incident. This has been happening for weeks, possibly months. "How is this possible?" I asked, struggling to comprehend how sewage could end up in my isolated lake. "There are no septic systems that drain this way. The nearest development is Highland Oaks, but they are uphill and at least half a mile through the woods." Jordan looked grim. "Let me check something." He took water samples from different points around the lake, then suggested we follow the small stream that fed into the north side of my property. We hiked through dense underbrush for about 20 minutes before the truth became horrifyingly clear. Hidden among the trees and deliberately camouflaged with brush was a large drainage pipe. Recent rainfall had washed away some of the concealing vegetation. The pipe emptied directly into the stream that fed my lake, and even from several feet away, the smell was unmistakable. "This is not legal," Jordan stated flatly, photographing the pipe and taking more samples. "This appears to be coming from Highland Oaks development. Their sewage treatment system must be failing, and rather than fix it properly, they created this illegal diversion." That afternoon, I drove to the Highland Oaks Community Center, where I knew the HOA president, Margaret Winters, held office hours. The pristine building with its manicured lawn stood in stark contrast to the environmental disaster they had created on my property. "Mrs. Winters," I began, trying to keep my voice steady. "My name is Daniel Lambert. I own the property with the lake downstream from your development. Your association has been illegally dumping sewage into the watershed that feeds my lake." Margaret barely looked up from her computer. Her silver hair was styled in an expensive bob, her clothes clearly indicating she was accustomed to the finer things in life. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked coldly. "No, but this is an emergency. The County Environmental Division has confirmed dangerous levels of sewage contamination coming from a pipe that drains from your property." She finally deigned to look at me, her expression one of practiced disdain. "Mr. Lambert, is it? Highland Oaks maintains all facilities to code. If your little mud puddle has water quality issues, perhaps you should look to your own property management skills." She turned back to her computer. "Now, if you will excuse me, I have actual appointments to keep." I stood there stunned by her dismissal. People could get sick. The ecosystem is already dying. You cannot just ignore this. "You can take your concerns to our legal department if you wish to pursue this matter. Gloria will give you their contact information on your way out." Her tone made it clear the conversation was over. As I turned to leave, I heard her mutter, "These people who buy cheap land and then expect the world to accommodate them." My blood boiled as I walked back to my car. This was not over, not by a long shot. The following morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. This situation required my full attention. If the HOA would not take responsibility willingly, I needed to build a case that would force their hand. The county record's office opened at 8, and I was the first person through the door. "I need everything you have on Highland Oaks development and the surrounding properties, including my own at 1452 Lakeside Road," I told the clerk, a kind-faced woman named Dolers who seemed surprised by my intensity. "That will take some time to compile," she warned. "We are talking about hundreds of documents spanning at least 20 years. "I will wait," I assured her, and wait I did. Hour after hour I combed through property deeds, zoning applications, environmental impact statements, and water rights documentation. By lunchtime, my eyes were strained, but I had begun to see a pattern emerge. 3 years ago, the Highland Oaks Association had applied for permits to upgrade their sewage treatment facility. The permits were approved, but subsequent inspection records showed the work was never completed to specification. More disturbing were the complaint records. 2 former environmental officers had cited the HOA for minor contamination issues in the watershed, but in both cases, the complaints were mysteriously dropped without resolution. The most recent complaint was filed just 6 months ago, with a note indicating voluntary compliance agreement reached, but no details on what that agreement entailed. I photographed every relevant document with my phone, creating a digital paper trail. By closing time, Dolers had to practically push me out the door. "We close at 5, honey. You can come back tomorrow if you need to continue." The next 3 days followed the same pattern. County Record's office during the day, organizing my findings each evening. I discovered that Highland Oaks had originally planned a smaller development with appropriate sewage infrastructure. But as housing demand grew, they expanded from 60 homes to over 200 without properly scaling their waste management systems. The documentation showed they were well aware of the problem, but had repeatedly chosen the cheapest temporary fixes rather than the comprehensive upgrade required. On day 4, I attended the monthly Highland Oaks HOA meeting as an observer. The community center meeting room was filled with about 50 residents, with Margaret and 4 other board members seated at a table at the front. I waited patiently through discussions of neighborhood landscaping violations and an upcoming community picnic before the meeting was opened for public comments. I approached the microphone, documentation in hand. "My name is Daniel Lambert. I own the property downstream from your development. For the past 6 months at minimum, your sewage system has been illegally discharging raw waste into the watershed that feeds my lake." Murmurs rippled through the crowd as I held up photographs of dead fish and county test results. The contamination levels are 8 times the legal limit. This is not just an environmental issue, but a public health hazard that affects everyone in this watershed. Margaret cut me off before I could continue. Mr. Lambert, this is a closed meeting for Highland Oaks residents and approved guests. You are neither. But this affects everyone here, I protested. Your HOA fees are being misused. Instead of properly fixing your sewage system, your board has been creating illegal drainage solutions that are destroying the local ecosystem. That is absolutely false, Margaret snapped. Mr. Lambert has no engineering qualifications and is making unfounded accusations. For the record, this will be noted as a public disturbance in the minutes. She nodded to a security guard who had appeared at my side. Please escort Mr. Lambert out. As I was led from the room, I heard her smoothly transition. Now, moving on to the proposal for new playground equipment. That evening, I contacted an environmental attorney named Sarah Jimenez, who specialized in water rights cases. Her office was small but neat, with framed newspaper articles about successful environmental lawsuits covering one wall. After reviewing my documentation for nearly an hour in silence, she finally looked up. You have a strong case for environmental damages, she said. But I have to be honest with you, Daniel. These fights are rarely quick or easy. HOAs like Highland Oaks have significant financial resources and legal teams on retainer. They will drag this out, file countersuits, and use every procedural delay possible. Are you prepared for what could be years of litigation with no guarantee of success? My heart sank. The lake cleanup alone would cost thousands, money I simply did not have. A prolonged legal battle might bankrupt me before justice was served. What other options do I have? I asked. Keep building your case, document everything, and look for leverage points we might have missed. She handed back my files. Sometimes these situations have solutions outside the courtroom. That night, discouraged but not defeated, I spread all my property documents across my dining table, including items left behind by the previous owner. As I reorganized the papers chronologically, an old surveyor's map caught my attention. The property boundaries marked on it did not quite match the current plat I had received during my purchase. There was a discrepancy on the northwest corner, a small wedge of land approximately 2 acres in size that appeared on the old map, but not the new one. I stared at the difference, wondering if this was a simple mapping error or something more significant. Either way, it warranted investigation. I made a note to hire a professional surveyor first thing in the morning. Something told me this discrepancy might be important. Well, this is interesting, said Elijah Washington, the surveyor I had hired to investigate the boundary discrepancy. We stood at the northwest corner of my property 3 days later, GPS equipment and original deed documents in hand. The morning sun filtered through the trees as Elijah compared his readings to the historical records. According to the original property survey from 1978, and confirmed by my current readings, your property line extends approximately 200 yards farther north than your current deed indicates. He pointed through the trees toward a densely wooded area I had never explored. That entire section, approximately 2 acres, legally belongs to you. My pulse quickened. How could this happen? How could land just disappear from my deed? Elijah shrugged. Clerical error, perhaps, or intentional modification somewhere along the chain of title. Real estate development companies have been known to conveniently adjust property lines when it benefits them. According to county records, Highland Oaks purchased all surrounding land parcels 15 years ago before beginning development. We hiked through the underbrush to the area in question. The land sloped gently upward, eventually revealing a clearing where a natural spring bubbled up from between moss-covered rocks. The water was crystal clear, forming a small stream that eventually fed into my lake. This is more than just additional acreage, Elijah observed. "This is a water source." That afternoon, I returned to the county record's office with my new information. Dolers, now familiar with my research project, helped me locate water rights documentation for the region. What we discovered was astonishing. The spring on my newly confirmed property was not just any water source. It was the primary water supply for the entire Highland Oaks development. According to these records, Dolers explained, Highland Oaks purchases water access from the current owner of this parcel. There is a registered easement for their water infrastructure, but the actual water rights belong to the property owner. She looked up at me with wide eyes. "Which appears to be you, not them." The implications were staggering. I scheduled another meeting with Sarah Jimenez the following day, bringing Elijah's survey results and the water rights documentation. As she examined the evidence, her expression transformed from professional interest to barely contained excitement. "Daniel, do you understand what this means?" she asked. "In this state, water rights are some of the most powerful legal instruments available. They cannot simply be taken from you, even through eminent domain, without significant due process and compensation." "So I own their water supply." I struggled to grasp the full implications. "You own the source of their water supply," she corrected, "and that gives you extraordinary leverage. However," she cautioned, holding up a finger, "we need to be extremely careful about how we proceed. Cutting off water to 200 homes would create substantial liability issues, not to mention the human cost." We spent the next 3 hours developing a strategy that would assert my rights while ensuring no residents would suffer immediate hardship. Sarah emphasized that our goal was remediation and compliance, not revenge. "Document everything," she advised before I left. "We need irrefutable evidence of the ongoing contamination to strengthen our position." Taking her advice to heart, I purchased several high-quality wildlife cameras designed for nighttime recording. Over the next week, I strategically placed these cameras around my property, focusing on the illegal drainage pipe and the areas where the contamination was most evident. The cameras were motion-activated and weather-resistant, perfect for gathering continuous evidence without my presence. After just 5 days, the cameras captured exactly what we needed. Following a heavy rainstorm, 2 maintenance workers in Highland Oaks uniforms arrived at the illegal drainage pipe. They methodically cleared debris that had built up, ensuring the sewage would continue flowing toward my lake rather than backing up into the development. More damning still, one worker made a phone call during which he clearly stated, "Yes, Ms. Winters, the diversion is clear now. No backup issues should occur at the main facility." This was the smoking gun we needed. The contamination was not accidental. It was a deliberate, ongoing policy directed by HOA leadership. I transferred all footage to secure cloud storage and delivered copies to both Sarah and the county environmental office. The revelation of the water rights and the video evidence transformed my position entirely. I had begun this battle as a victim seeking justice. Now I held powerful leverage that could force real change. Yet I remained cautious about how to use this newfound power. 200 families depended on that water source. Children, elderly residents, people who had no part in their HOA's criminal behavior. Whatever steps I took next needed to balance justice with compassion. "We have them," Sarah said when I showed her the video evidence. "But let us proceed carefully and strategically. Sometimes the most effective power is the power held in reserve." With the video evidence secured and my property rights confirmed, Sarah drafted a formal cease and desist letter to the Highland Oaks HOA board. The document detailed the environmental violations with timestamps and locations, included still images from the wildlife camera footage, and demanded immediate cessation of all sewage dumping. It also required a written remediation plan within 10 business days. This approach gives them an opportunity to do the right thing without immediately escalating to litigation or water rights issues, Sarah explained. How they respond will tell us a lot about how to proceed. The letter was delivered via certified mail, requiring signature confirmation. 3 days passed with no response. Then 5. By day 7, my frustration was mounting. Should not they have acknowledged receipt at minimum? I asked Sarah during our phone check-in. Technically, yes, but HOAs like Highland Oaks often use silence as a strategy. They hope you will get discouraged and go away. She sounded unsurprised. Let us give them the full 10 days before taking next steps. On day 8, I discovered how Highland Oaks had chosen to respond. Not with a direct acknowledgement, but through community manipulation. A neighbor who lived just outside the HOA boundary brought me a copy of the Highland Oaks monthly newsletter. "Thought you might want to see this," he said grimly. The front-page article, titled "External Threats to Our Community Values," did not name me directly but was transparent in its target. Residents should be aware that an individual from outside our community has made unfounded claims regarding our water and sewage infrastructure. These baseless accusations threaten our property values and community standing. The board assures all residents that our facilities meet or exceed all county requirements, as verified by independent inspectors. We ask community members to report any suspicious individuals photographing or examining our infrastructure, as this could represent a security threat. The deliberate misinformation campaign infuriated me. Not only were they ignoring the legal notice, but they were also actively turning residents against me before I could present evidence of the board's negligence. The following morning, I found an unmarked envelope in my mailbox. Inside was a crudely printed note. "Drop it or regret it. We know where you live." The implicit threat was clear. Rather than intimidating me, it only confirmed that someone in Highland Oaks leadership was seriously concerned about what I had discovered. I immediately reported the threat to the county sheriff's department and installed additional security cameras around my home. Sarah advised documenting everything but continuing with our strategy. This kind of intimidation tactic often indicates weakness, not strength, she observed. They would not resort to this if they had solid legal ground to stand on. As the 10-day response period neared its end with no formal acknowledgement from the HOA, Sarah and I discussed next steps. "We could file an environmental lawsuit now," she said, "or we could try one more approach that might yield faster results." "What did you have in mind?" I asked. "The board has been keeping information from the residents. Most homeowners likely have no idea what their HOA is doing. What if we bring the evidence directly to them?" The plan was bold but potentially effective. The monthly HOA meeting was scheduled for the following evening. While I was not a member and had been ejected from the previous meeting, Sarah suggested I attend again, this time prepared to share the video evidence directly with residents before the board could stop me. Bring everything: the environmental reports, the survey results, and most importantly, the video footage. If you can get even 5 minutes to present before they stop you, it could change the entire dynamic. The community center was more crowded than the previous month when I arrived for the meeting. Word of the external threat had apparently drawn more curious residents. I positioned myself near the back, laptop ready with the evidence queued up. Margaret Winters called the meeting to order precisely at 7, moving efficiently through the standard agenda items. When the meeting opened for resident comments, I moved quickly to the microphone. Before Margaret could object, I spoke clearly into the microphone. My name is Daniel Lambert. I own the property downstream from Highland Oaks. I am here to share critical information about environmental violations that affect everyone in this room. Margaret immediately tried to cut me off. Mr. Lambert, as we explained last month, these meetings are for residents only. Security will escort you out. A murmur ran through the crowd. Before security could reach me, an older resident stood up. I would like to hear what he has to say. The newsletter mentioned complaints about our water system. As someone who drinks that water every day, I have a right to know if there are problems. Several other residents voiced agreement. Sensing the shift in mood, Margaret reluctantly allowed me to continue, though she reminded everyone that my time would be strictly limited to 3 minutes. "Thank you," I said, connecting my laptop to the projector system. 3 minutes will be sufficient to show you what your HOA board has been hiding." The room fell silent as the first video appeared on screen. The footage clearly showed Highland Oaks maintenance workers clearing the illegal drainage pipe, followed by close-up shots of sewage flowing directly into the stream that fed my lake. I narrated calmly. This pipe was installed without permits and directs sewage overflow directly into the watershed. County environmental tests confirm contamination levels 8 times the legal limit. Gasps and shocked murmurs filled the room as the evidence played. When the maintenance worker's phone call to Margaret became audible, with her name clearly mentioned, she stood up in obvious panic. "This is an unauthorized recording. Turn that off immediately." I continued despite her protests. "Your HOA has been aware of sewage system failures for years, but has chosen to implement illegal dumping rather than proper repairs. This not only destroys my property, but creates potential health risks for everyone in the watershed area, including many of your own homes on the development's lower streets." A woman in the front row stood up. "My daughter has had recurring skin rashes after swimming in her friend's pool on Oakdale Drive. Could this be connected?" Before I could answer, Margaret cut the power to the projector. "This meeting is adjourned," she announced sharply. "Please exit in an orderly fashion. The board will investigate these claims and report back at next month's meeting." But the residents were not ready to leave. Multiple people approached me, asking for copies of the evidence and sharing their own concerns about water quality issues they had noticed. One resident, who introduced himself as a retired environmental engineer, examined my documentation with growing alarm. "This is far worse than I suspected," he said gravely. "Our HOA fees increase every year supposedly for infrastructure maintenance, but I have wondered where that money actually goes." As residents formed small, intense discussion groups throughout the room, the HOA board members huddled in a corner, their expressions a mixture of anger and concern. Margaret kept glancing in my direction with undisguised hostility. I had disrupted their carefully maintained narrative, and the residents were beginning to ask questions the board did not want to answer. I left the meeting feeling cautiously optimistic. The truth was now public, and the HOA could no longer hide behind silence or intimidation. The next move would be theirs, and I suspected it would come quickly. 3 days after the HOA meeting, I received a letter from Whitaker, Prescott & Chen, the law firm representing Highland Oaks Association. The letter was professionally threatening, dismissing my alleged environmental concerns as exaggerated while simultaneously offering a settlement of $20,000 for any legitimate remediation needs on my property. The catch, of course, was a non-disclosure agreement and full release of all future claims. The final paragraph contained the real message. Should you decline this generous offer and pursue specious claims against Highland Oaks Association, be advised that our firm is prepared to defend our client through all available legal channels. The financial resources required for protracted environmental litigation often exceed the means of individual property owners, frequently resulting in bankruptcy before resolution can be achieved. Sarah was unimpressed when I forwarded her the letter. A classic intimidation tactic, she noted. The settlement would barely cover your lake cleanup costs, with nothing for the ongoing environmental damage or the deliberate nature of the violations. And that veiled bankruptcy threat is particularly telling. They are hoping you will take the quick money and go away. What is our next move? I asked. I think it is time to reveal our full position, she said. Let us schedule a meeting with their attorneys and the HOA board, face to face, with all cards on the table. The meeting was arranged for the following Monday at Sarah's office. Her small conference room felt crowded with 3 attorneys from Whitaker, Prescott and Chen, Margaret Winters, and 2 other HOA board members present. Everyone was dressed formally, creating an atmosphere of serious business. After introductions, the lead HOA attorney, Richard Whitaker, began with a rehearsed speech about good faith negotiations and community harmony. He reiterated the settlement offer as though it was extraordinarily generous. When he finished, Sarah smiled pleasantly. "Thank you for that opening, Mr. Whitaker. Before we discuss financial remediation, I believe there are some factual matters that need clarification." She slid copies of Elijah's survey report and the county water rights documentation across the table. "My client, Mr. Lambert, recently discovered a significant property boundary discrepancy that directly impacts these negotiations." As they reviewed the documents, the atmosphere in the room shifted perceptibly. Richard's confident expression faltered as he reached the section detailing water rights ownership. Margaret leaned forward, her face paling as she read. "This cannot be correct," she finally said. "Highland Oaks has maintained water infrastructure in that area for 15 years. "Yes," Sarah agreed. "Through an easement agreement with the legal property owner, which records now confirm is Mr. Lambert. The previous records were incorrectly filed during your development process." Richard whispered something to his colleagues, then addressed us again. "These survey results would need to be independently verified before we could acknowledge any change in property status." "Of course," Sarah replied smoothly. "We have already scheduled a county surveyor to officially record the corrected boundaries next week. We merely wanted to inform you as a professional courtesy, given the implications for Highland Oaks water supply." The implications hung in the air like a physical presence. Everyone in the room understood what this meant. The HOA had been illegally dumping sewage onto property belonging to the person who controlled their water source. "Perhaps," Richard suggested, his tone markedly less confident, "we should recess this meeting to allow consultation with our clients about these new developments." "Of course," Sarah agreed. "However, we should note that Mr. Lambert has already filed updated water rights documentation with the county. As of this morning, he is the registered owner of record for the spring that supplies Highland Oaks development." Margaret could not contain herself. "This is blackmail. You cannot just cut off water to 200 homes." I spoke for the first time since introductions. "I have no intention of disrupting water service to innocent homeowners, Mrs. Winters. Unlike the Highland Oaks Board, I take public health and environmental responsibility seriously. I am simply establishing the legal facts before we discuss appropriate remediation for the damage your policies have caused." An emergency HOA board meeting was called for that evening. Though not a resident, I was now invited as an interested party, with Sarah accompanying me as counsel. The community center meeting room was packed beyond capacity, with residents standing along the walls. Margaret attempted one last effort to control the narrative, presenting the property survey as a disputed technical issue that the board was addressing. She proposed hiring independent surveyors to resolve the confusion. This approach might have worked had the county surveyor not arrived mid-meeting. He had completed his official assessment that afternoon and came directly to share his findings, confirming what Elijah had discovered. My property indeed included the 2-acre parcel containing the spring, and all associated water rights belonged legally to me. As this reality sank in, the meeting atmosphere transformed from skepticism to alarm. Residents began peppering the board with questions about how such a critical oversight could have occurred and what it meant for their water security. During the chaos, a young mother approached me privately. "Mr. Lambert, my son has had recurring stomach issues for months. Our doctor suggested testing our home water supply, but the HOA assured us their testing showed no problems. Now I am wondering if there might be a connection to these sewage issues." She was not the only one. Throughout the evening, at least a dozen residents shared concerns about unusual water quality problems, everything from odd tastes and smells to unexplained rashes and digestive issues. Many lived in the lower sections of the development, closest to where the sewage system connected to the main infrastructure. As the meeting continued, I observed Margaret's demeanor change. The smug confidence that had characterized our previous interactions was gone, replaced by a growing realization that this situation extended far beyond one angry neighbor with a polluted lake. Her position of authority was eroding rapidly, as residents began to question what other problems might have been concealed from them. For the first time since our conflict began, I saw genuine concern in her expression. Not for me or my property, perhaps, but for the widening implications of the infrastructure failures and potential health risks to the community she was elected to serve. The board could no longer hide behind legal threats or dismissive attitudes. The truth had emerged, and with it came accountability. In the days following the emergency meeting, an extraordinary transformation began within Highland Oaks. Robert Chen, the retired environmental engineer who had examined my documentation, formed a resident action committee independent from the HOA board. Within a week, over 60 homeowners had joined, creating a powerful new voice in the community. Robert contacted me directly. "We need your help, Daniel. Many of us have suspected infrastructure problems for years, but we never had proof until now. With your evidence and expertise, we can push for a comprehensive assessment of all systems, not just the sewage issues affecting your lake." I agreed to collaborate, sharing all my research and connecting Robert's group with both environmental authorities and independent engineers qualified to evaluate the full scope of the problems. The resident committee pooled resources to hire Westlake Engineering, a respected firm specializing in residential infrastructure assessment. The Westlake report, delivered 3 weeks later, confirmed our worst fears. The sewage dumping was indeed just the visible symptom of widespread infrastructure failures throughout Highland Oaks. The development had been built rapidly during a housing boom, with corners cut on numerous essential systems. Storm drainage, sewage treatment, water distribution, all showed signs of dangerous degradation after years of minimal maintenance. Most concerning were the water quality tests conducted in homes throughout the development. While the water from my spring tested pure at the source, Contamination was detected in various sections of the distribution system, particularly in lower elevation areas where sewage and water pipes ran in close proximity. Cross-contamination had occurred in multiple locations, explaining the health issues many residents had experienced. With this comprehensive evidence, Roberts' committee approached the County Environmental Protection Office, which had previously been reluctant to challenge the politically connected HOA. Now faced with documented violations and organized community pressure, the county launched a formal investigation. Margaret and the board made one final attempt to maintain control, calling another emergency meeting where they proposed a minimal remediation plan that would address only the most visible problems while preserving the HOA's substantial financial reserves. The board has developed a fiscally responsible approach to addressing these maintenance concerns, Margaret announced to the assembled residents. Our plan will bring all systems into basic compliance while minimizing the financial impact on homeowners. The special assessment would be approximately $500 per household. Robert stood immediately. That plan only addresses the illegal discharge pipe affecting Mr. Lambert's property. It does nothing about the cross-contamination issues in our own water supply or the structural failures identified in the engineering report. The meeting reached a turning point when Dr. Elena Rodriguez from the County Public Health Department presented her findings. I had not known she would be attending, but Robert had apparently invited her to review the water quality data. Based on samples collected from 26 homes in Highland Oaks, we have identified coliform bacteria counts that exceed safety standards in 14 locations, Dr. Rodriguez stated flatly. These contamination patterns are consistent with sewage infiltration into water supply lines. I am officially recommending that residents in affected areas use bottled water for drinking and cooking until this situation is resolved. The room erupted in concerned conversation. Margaret's minimalist proposal was unanimously rejected. Instead, residents voted to authorize Roberts' committee to work with qualified experts to develop a comprehensive remediation plan. Over the next 2 weeks, I collaborated closely with Roberts' committee, environmental specialists, and engineering consultants. Together, we created a detailed infrastructure rehabilitation program that addressed not just the sewage dumping affecting my property, but all the systemic problems threatening the Highland Oaks community. The plan required significant investment, approximately $4,000 per household, but provided long-term protection for both human health and environmental sustainability. What had begun as my isolated fight for justice had transformed into a community awakening to environmental responsibility. Residents who had once viewed me with suspicion now sought my input and expertise. The dynamic had shifted completely from adversarial conflict to collaborative problem-solving. The final community vote on the comprehensive remediation plan was scheduled for the following week. As Robert and I finalized our presentation materials, he shook his head in amazement. You know, if the HOA had simply taken responsibility when you first approached them, this could have been resolved for a fraction of the cost, both financial and human. I nodded in agreement. Sometimes systems need to break completely before they can be properly rebuilt. Spring arrived with remarkable transformations both to my property and the Highland Oaks community. After months of negotiation, environmental assessment, and legal maneuvering, a comprehensive settlement had been reached. The agreement extended far beyond financial compensation for my lake damage, creating a new model for environmental stewardship in the region. The HOA agreed to fund complete restoration of my lake ecosystem, under the supervision of aquatic biologists from the state university. Specialized microorganisms were introduced to break down remaining contaminants, followed by carefully selected native plants and fish species to rebuild the natural balance. The illegal drainage pipe was removed entirely, replaced by a state-of-the-art sewage treatment system that exceeded all regulatory requirements. For my part, I agreed to formalize water rights through a conservation easement that guaranteed continued water supply to Highland Oaks while protecting the spring and surrounding watershed from future development or contamination. The legal framework ensured both my property rights and the community's water security would be preserved regardless of future ownership changes. Perhaps most significant was the structural reorganization of Highland Oaks governance. The settlement required the establishment of an environmental oversight committee with independent authority to monitor infrastructure maintenance and environmental compliance. This committee, comprised of qualified residents and external experts, had direct access to financial resources and decision-making authority equal to the main HOA board. Margaret Winters and 2 other long-serving board members chose to resign rather than operate under the new transparency requirements. Their replacements, elected by overwhelming community support, included Robert Chen and 2 other members of the Resident Action Committee that had formed during the crisis. On a personal level, the settlement provided sufficient funds to completely restore my property and compensate me for the months of distress. But the true value went far beyond monetary considerations. The experience had transformed not just my lake, but an entire community's relationship with the environment they inhabited. Throughout spring and summer, I watched with growing satisfaction as my once poisoned lake gradually returned to life. Water quality tests showed steady improvement. Small fish, introduced under careful biological supervision, darted beneath the surface where months before only contamination had existed. Native plants took root along the restored shoreline, their presence attracting dragonflies, frogs, and birds that had abandoned the area during the worst of the pollution. Highland Oaks underwent its own transformation. The community embraced environmental education programs about watershed protection and sustainable water management. Children from the development participated in weekend restoration activities, learning firsthand about ecosystem balance and environmental responsibility. Many families regularly walked the new nature trail that connected their community to the protected spring area, developing personal connections to the natural resources they had previously taken for granted. 1 year after discovering the sewage contamination, I hosted a community gathering on my property to celebrate the installation of a state-of-the-art water quality monitoring system. The technology provided real-time data on water conditions throughout the watershed, accessible to all residents through a public website. Any variation from established parameters would trigger immediate alerts, ensuring no future contamination could go undetected. Robert Chen, now serving as the head of the Environmental Oversight Committee, addressed the gathered residents. 1 year ago, we stood on opposite sides of a property line, seeing each other as adversaries rather than neighbors sharing the same ecosystem. Today, we stand together as stewards of a resource that connects and sustains us all. Many of the faces that had once looked at me with suspicion or hostility now showed appreciation and respect. Children splashed in the shallow edges of the restored lake, while their parents enjoyed a community picnic on my property. The boundaries between mine and theirs had softened into a shared responsibility for the natural systems that supported all our lives. Even more surprising was the regional impact of our story. Environmental groups from neighboring counties visited to study the comprehensive remediation model we had implemented. Two nearby developments, facing similar infrastructure challenges, proactively adopted oversight committees based on the Highland Oaks model. The County Environmental Protection Office used our case study when drafting new regulations for development oversight and water quality protection. As the celebration wound down and residents began returning home, I found myself standing alone at the edge of my dock, watching the sunset reflect on water that once again ran clear and healthy. A voice behind me broke my reverie. "I owe you an apology." I turned to find Margaret Winters standing there, looking somewhat diminished without her former position of authority. It was the first time I had seen her since her resignation 6 months earlier. "I was wrong," she continued, "not just about the sewage issue, but about how I viewed my responsibility to the community. I was so focused on keeping HOA fees low and property values high that I lost sight of what truly mattered." Her admission surprised me. "What will you do now?" I asked. "Moving to Arizona to be near my grandchildren," she replied. "But before I left, I needed to tell you that despite our conflicts, what happened here has changed how I see things. You could have simply cut off our water supply and forced compliance through fear. Instead, you chose a path that ultimately benefited everyone." After she left, I reflected on the journey of the past year. What had begun as an environmental disaster had transformed into something unexpected, a model for how communities could protect shared natural resources while respecting both property rights and environmental responsibilities. The lawsuit that Sarah and I had initially prepared had never been filed. Instead, education, collaboration, and strategic pressure had accomplished far more than litigation likely would have. The lake that had first drawn me to this property now symbolized something broader than personal ownership. It represented the delicate balance between individual rights and collective responsibility, between human development and natural systems. As darkness fell and the first stars appeared overhead, I realized that sometimes the most powerful weapon against institutional negligence is not vengeance, but the persistent pursuit of justice that serves both people and the planet we share. The spring that connected my property to Highland Oaks would continue flowing long after all of us were gone. But now it would flow through communities that understood its value and accepted their role in protecting it. That legacy of stewardship, more than any legal victory or financial settlement, was the true resolution I had sought from the beginning.